When it comes to horror movies, no decade can rival the 1980s. It built on the foundation laid in the 1970s, before the 1990s came along and killed it. The 1980s released some of the most successful and highly influential horror films to ever hit the big screen. However, this horror boom also led to an oversaturated market in which amateur wannabe directors tried to replicate their successful predecessors. And just like that, the latter half of the 80s was chock full of silly and idiotic knockoffs and half-baked originals. Hi guys, it's Hyde, and welcome to my review of Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama, which some consider a cult classic in cheesy 80s trash cinema. So let's get started and get right into the plot of this intricate and sophisticated film. One night, three amorous nerds have nothing better to do with their lives than to sneak over to the Tri-Delta sorority and peep in on the hazing of their new pledges. The three degenerates get caught, and instead of calling the cops, the sorority sisters smartly decide to have their pledges along with the three peeping toms break into the mall to steal a trophy. While inside, the five come across local tough girl Spider, and a trophy, which they manage to drop and unleash an evil imp that grants them all one wish. However, unlike most imps, this one cannot be trusted, and this bowling alley quickly becomes infested with demons and death. This unlikely group must band together to defeat the vile Uncle Impy, otherwise they will never make it out alive. Are you still with me? Good. Now I will be the first to admit that there is a time and a place for ludicrous and stupid horror movies, and I am a fan of some pretty bad horror movies myself. But there is a limit, and Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama crosses that line. The first blatant sign that this movie doesn't have much substance is the title. The name of this movie is by far the most interesting thing about it, and more than likely the only reason that anyone has ever watched it. It's very rare that a movie with such a brash and obnoxious title is ever any good. More often than not, it's an extremely cheap trick to gain an audience. The next obvious clue that this movie didn't have a lot to offer is its gratuitous inclusion of exploitation. This is yet another cheap attempt to direct the attention of the audience away from the shallowness that permeates from every corner of this movie. Aside from the noticeably poor gimmicks, the actual execution of this movie was hardly better. The overall story was paper thin, and at times made me wonder if some of the scenes were written the day of filming. I mean, I'm actually somewhat impressed that they were able to make a feature-length film with so little in the script. The acting was also pretty bad, even though it did star three recognizable scream queens: Brinke Stevens, Bauer, and the most famous of all, Linnea Quigley. This movie also had the late great George Buck Flowers, who actually had the best scene in the entire film. Unfortunately, having these talented actresses and actor did little to help with the rest of the cast. In fact, it actually did quite the opposite, as it made the lack of acting by everyone else that much more apparent. And no review of Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama would be complete without of course mentioning the evil antagonist imp. Curiously named Uncle Impy, this evil genie imposter is about as scary as an immature prank. He looked like some sort of inbred offspring of a retarded gremlin and Yoda, and seriously had some of the worst spoken lines in cinema history. To say the least, he was not scary, but he also wasn't funny either, and in the end, he just ended up being rather annoying. In this movie's defense, however, Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama was never meant to be taken as a serious film. The latter half of the 1980s saw an excess of these campy horror movies, a somewhat unfortunate evolution from what the beginning of the decade offered. And while these trashy movies all had terrible acting, cheap effects, outrageous titles, and unnecessary birthday suits, some of them managed to be quite hilarious and surprisingly good. Unfortunately, Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama's vulgar and obvious use of cheap and unsophisticated antics to gain an audience comes across as desperate and ruins any possible campy charm this movie might have. If this movie were to be graded on a curve as those of its peers, it would be average at best. And if you are a fan of campy horror and extreme overuse of cheap exploitation, then there very well could be some things about this movie for you. And even though this low-budget horror movie isn't the worst thing I've ever seen, even on the campy horror grading curve, there are way better out there. On a personal note, I saw this movie many years ago, and it wasn't until very recently that a good friend of mine revealed to me that he actually worked on several trashy 1980s horror movies. Sorority Babes in the Slimeball Bowl-O-Rama just happened to be one of them. He was the hairstylist and makeup artist, and as such got to do the makeup and hair on three iconic scream queens. And even though this movie isn't very good, the makeup and hair wasn't bad at all. And it is pretty cool to have a friend like him who also did some work in one of my favorite hobbies, which is horror. So Ralphie, this one is for you. Much love, and I promise I will watch Creepazoids and Assault of the Killer Bimbos very soon. And guys, that's going to be it for this review. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe so you won't miss out on any future videos. And I will see you on the other side, right here on Hyde's Horror. Thanks for watching, guys.